Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. Welcome to another podcast on Quality Management System Essentials. And this week we'll be discussing external quality assessment. The objectives of this podcast today would be that we should be able to discuss the importance of an EQA program in improving the quality of laboratory tests, describe at least 3 EQA methods and the advantages and disadvantages of each, and outline a method to investigate an unacceptable test result from an EQA sample. EQA, ladies and gentlemen, is the external quality assurance. So from this point onwards, I'll be referring to external quality assurance as EQA. Let's lay out a scenario. A newly appointed lab supervisor has begun reviewing past EQA results and observed poor gram stain performance. A newly appointed lab supervisor has begun reviewing past EQA results and observes poor gram stain performance. The question is, how should the laboratory investigate this problem? How should the laboratory investigate this problem? So your lab has been taking part in external quality assurance scheme on gram staining, and when the lab supervisor begins reviewing these results, he finds that there is a problem in the performance. How should the lab investigate this problem? Now, external quality assessment is defined as a system for objectively checking the laboratory's performance using an external agency or facility. So basically, you are working well, but you want an assurance from an external agency or another facility, maybe a reference laboratory, that your performance is at its peak. And so you engage in EQA programs. So EQA methods are performed in 3 ways. One is via proficiency testing, where you are sent up an unknown panel and you process the way you would process patient samples. You return the results, and then the result is marked against your peers. The second method is rechecking and retesting. And the third one is on-site evaluation, where an EQA officer from a facility or an agency would come and observe real-time how a test is being done. And this is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm going to share my experiences with the labs that I was evaluating on site. So it's essentially a comparison among different test sites, as I say, amongst the peer labs or testing labs. And it is an early warning for systemic problems. It is also an objective evidence of testing quality, and also highlights areas that need improvement and the training needs of the laboratory. So the benefits of EQA is that the laboratory is laboratory oriented, or there are laboratory oriented objectives against public health oriented objectives. So these are 2 different scenarios and the benefits, both for individual labs or public health. And the EQA could be at no cost, that is free. It could be at cost, that is not free, depending on the arrangements. It could be obligatory or voluntary. However, when your lab is working towards getting an accreditation, either College of American Pathologists or ISO 15189 or any other accreditation, then it doesn't become voluntary anymore, but it is obligatory that your lab must take part in an EQA survey. These could also be from regional, national, or international bodies. regional as in maybe, in East Africa or East Central Africa, or West Africa, Southeast Asia, European, whatever they may be. They could also be national, like for example, the UK External Quality Assurance Scheme, UK NECAS, as it is famously known. It could also be mono or multi-panel. For example, Canadian CASI would send you just one test. Other bodies would send you maybe just a gram stain, or they could be sending you a whole slew of panels for you to test. And it is providing recognition and also used as an educational tool that you can use it after you have processed the sample and submitted the results. Then you've gotten the results back. You can use it as an educational tool. It is important for improvement because, as we have emphasized over and over again, it is always important that we continually improve. And it is also a measure of laboratory performance. If you're getting the correct results 60% of the time, it means 40% of the time your results are incorrect. And because you have been processing the panels the same way that you process patient samples, it means 40% of the patient's sample results are incorrect. Now, the pass mark usually is 80%, that you get it right 80% of the time, then you're doing very well. However, my belief has been and continues to be that we should perform at 100% of the time, because we don't want to be at the end of the receiving line on the other side getting the 1% error in the results. Now, according to the ISO Guide 43-1 of 1997, the EQA is defined as proficiency test schemes are interlaboratory comparisons that are organized regularly to assess the performance of analytical labs and the competence of the analytical personnel. So two things that are being tested here: the performance of the labs and the competence of the personnel. When we discussed about organization, and we're going to discuss this in more detail in personnel, that you have hired a new staff, you have onboarded them, you have trained them, and then before they start processing actual samples, you must determine their competence. And you can use these EQA panels or an unknown samples in the lab, known samples in the lab, but you must determine their competence. And according to the CLSI, proficiency testing is a program in which multiple samples are periodically sent to members of a group of labs for analysis and or identification, whereby each lab's results are compared with those of other labs in the group and or with an assigned value and reported to the participating laboratories and others. So these others could be the sponsor of the laboratory, it could be the management of the laboratory, could be the government agencies, could be WHO or others who have an interest in the results that are being generated by your laboratory. Now, the PT organization provider, that's the proficiency test organization provider, would prepare the samples, and these samples are sent regularly. Then the lab would receive the samples, analyze them, return the results, and more often than not, these results are entered on the web, and the PT provider would have indicated when these results are due, the latest date that these results are due. My experience, again, if you allow me to share them with you, is that at the beginning of the budget year or at the end of the previous budget year, you have to plan for the following year which proficiency test samples you're going to receive, agree with the PT samples provider on when they're going to be shipped, taking care of the shipping schedules of the airlines and your own internal in-country clearance procedures at the airport, because these can take a long time and you may receive a sample, a PT sample, 1 day or 2 days before the results are required to be entered. And for example, if this PT sample is, for example, a culture and sensitivity sample, then it means that in 1 day or 2 days you are not able to do it, and then you have to return that these were not done. Then you have to, perform an investigation as to why this was not done, and this will not reflect very well in the evaluation of your laboratory. So once you have returned these results to the PT provider, they will evaluate and issue a performance report and give you a score. You will receive the report. Usually I designate the lab managers and the QA officer to receive these reports. I receive them. If I receive them, then I would forward it to them. Then they would evaluate, and then they would bring to me for final evaluation. And I would, put my remarks as satisfactory performance, excellent performance, performance unsatisfactory, and if it is unsatisfactory, that investigation is required. And I give a due date when I expect to receive the investigation and the corrective actions and preventative actions that have been initiated to ensure that such a failure does not take place another time. Now, there are different roles for the laboratory. Let's take, for example, we are taking part in ISO 15189 and several labs. These labs could be, twin labs. They could be totally different Ministry of Health labs. They could be different countries' labs. So between lab 1 and lab 2, there should be no discussion between these two labs before the samples are processed and results submitted and the final results obtained. So you obtain the sample, or you analyze the same way with the same personnel, and then you submit the final PT report. And then, as I said previously, you determine corrective action and preventative action, then review if there is an improvement in the performance. If there is no improvement, for example, it is a technician problem, then it means that technician, you need to write a memo, and the technician is removed from the testing of those samples until they are deemed to be competent again and they're tested. Don't use it as punitively unless it is out of control, because when you use it punitively, it means that you will not be able to get the correct performance of your laboratory. The information received from the proficiency testing participation must be directed towards improvement in the lab to receive the full value as I've indicated. But when you use it punitively, then you will not receive the full value of your lab's participation in the proficiency testing. As in everything, there are limitations, and PT results are affected by variables not related to patient samples, because the patient sample matrix and the PT samples matrix may be slightly different. They are not absolutely the same, and the patient samples are, as of necessity, fresh samples, while the PT samples are frozen samples or dehydrated samples. The PT panels will also not detect all problems in the laboratory. We have to be aware of that, and that it may not detect problems with pre and post-examination procedures. Like if, for example, it is skin preparation, it is drawing of the sample, is sample packaging in the right container, sample transportation, it may not be able to identify those problems. Or post-examination procedures, like, for example, clerical errors and transmission of results and recall of incorrect results. Now, other EQA methods of rechecking and retesting. So if you consider yourself as a peripheral laboratory and you have performed the PT, the proficiency testing, and there are problems, you have done an investigation, you can also share those panels. You can aliquot the sample and share it with the reference laboratory for rechecking to see if there is a problem. Now, my experience again is that the PT panel providers are not infallible. I remember at some point, my lab, there was this technician that we had designated to be checking pregnancy test PT panels, and he performed it. He was always getting it right 100% of the time. Now, this particular time, the results came back that he had failed. He came to my office, he was very agitated, and he said that that result is not correct. And asked him why. Has he done an investigation? He says, I don't need to do an investigation. I know and I trust my results. I said, okay, let's get down to the lab and recheck. And he retrieved the sample, he tested it, and he got the same results. We wrote back after I trusted his results. So we wrote back to this international proficiency test provider. And lo and behold, the proficiency test provider accepted that there was an error, there was a problem with that sample. And then they had to get in touch with all the other participating laboratories from the results that this technician had got in our lab. And there have been one or two other instances that I can point out that this has opened. So they are not infallible. As one of my professors taught me years ago, is that if your method is correct, trust your results. If your method is correct, trust your results. And he also said that microorganisms do not read textbooks. So they will not behave the way they are described in textbooks, but they will behave the way they want to. Because from the time the textbooks were published 10, 15 years ago, they would have evolved, they would have mutated and behaved differently. So if your method is correct, trust your results. Now, in retesting, as I indicated a few moments ago, this should be done by a reference laboratory who also have quality management systems in place, and they also take part in EQA testing. And this testing should not be blinded, and the results should be statistically significant. This retesting between the testing lab and the reference lab is primarily used to assess, for example, HIV rapid testing or other rapid tests. Now, in rechecking, the samples must be collected randomly and avoid systematic sampling bias. That is, for example, collecting the samples that were only drawn from a certain population of people or only drawn by a certain individual. The results should be statistically significant, and also ensure that you resolve any discrepancies and have effective feedback. This is primarily used for stains like acid-fast bacilli staining, AFB staining. Now, when you make a comparison of rechecking non-blinded and random blinded smears, for example, for AFB, then you look at, for example, lab A versus lab B. When the samples are not blinded, then there was an agreement, sensitivity agreement of 99.7%. When the random blinded sample was used, the sensitivity lowered to 86.7%, as opposed to state B, or lab B, where the sensitivity for non-blinded sample was 98.9%, and for the random blinded sample was 84.7%. In lab C, the specificity was 99.8% for non-blinded samples and 99.1% for the random blinded sample. And lab B, specificity was 99.9% for non-blinded sample and 99.7% for random blinded sample. I have taken these figures from Martinez et al. 2005. And if you'd like this reference, I could share it with you. When, on the other hand, the proficiency testing is done on site by an external evaluator, this is used to obtain a realistic picture of laboratory practices. However, there are some people who become very nervous and are not able to work optimally when they know that they are being observed. However, this must be done, and so you have to prepare your staff, you have to prepare your lab for this on-site evaluation. It could be that you've been given a definite date when they will come, or they could just pop in one morning or one afternoon and say, we are going to evaluate the lab. And this is important, and it provides assistance with problem areas, because the evaluator is able to assess real time and see where the problems are and provide assistance. Now, I have again taken another example from Aziz and Brazil in the International Journal of Tuberculosis and Lung Diseases, publication of 2002, slightly old publication, but let's just use this as an example of AFB microscopy comparison of performance before and after on-site monitoring, where they found no sand bucket. Before, the performance was 96%, and after it was 27%. Where there was no decontamination of sputum caps, the performance changed from before, I'm giving you the before and after figures, 60 and 23%. No disinfectant, before the performance was 31% and it came down to 4%. No biohazard waste being covered, 48 against 8%. No lab coats being worn, before performance was 48%, after performance was 46%, not much difference between the two. Technologists do not wash their hands. The performance variation before and after was 17 against 4%. Shortage of lab reagents. This was a huge figure of before 75%, and after introduction, then it was 27%. Improper sputum collection, before performance was 60% and after 31%. Improper filling of lab register, before was 29% and after 4%. Improper labeling of slides on containers, before was 31% and after 13%. Looking at proficiency testing and rechecking, if we look at the different characteristics between PT and rechecking, interlab comparison, yes. Simulated samples, PT, yes. Retesting, no. Real samples, yes. Yes. Time and resources needed for the PT is less, for the rechecking is more. Analytes evaluated for the PT would be many, for the rechecking would be few. And I would like to strongly recommend that all laboratories, all medical diagnostic laboratories, all clinical laboratory diagnostic laboratories must take part in EQA participation as it is recommended in the ISO 15189 requirements for accreditation. So you want your lab accredited, you have got no option. As I said earlier, it is obligatory that you must take part in EQA participation. Now, so you have gone through that and you have identified an EQA provider, you have worked out the kinks in the supply chain, and you receive your panels as on time. You have sufficient time to process them and return the results. So you want to treat the EQA samples the same way as you treat the patient samples. And you have to monitor and maintain these records in perpetuity so that you can always go back to them and use them also as a teaching aid. Also, you must investigate deficiencies, because when your lab is audited, the auditors will ask for these records, and they would look at them whether, one, what has been your performance, and if there has been incorrect results, have they been reviewed? After review, was investigation required? And if investigation was done, were they completed and corrective action taken? And is the corrective action working? Again, sharing my experience here, when I took over the directorship of a certain lab and I started reviewing the EQA performance, I found that 98% of the time for a particular panel, these panels, the investigations had not been completed, meaning that now it had become a systemic problem. So, and when you want the staff now to complete this, you would get pushback, but you really have to push also for this to be completed. It takes time, but you must follow up diligently and ensure that all of those investigations are done and done correctly, and you will be able to observe huge market improvement, just like in the figures that I shared with you about the AFB panel. Now, also manage the corrective action efforts, as I've indicated, and communicate the outcomes. This is particularly so that you correct it diligently, use it as a moment for training and for help. This is where your management skills as a lab manager or the lab director come into play, because I need not emphasize anymore that if you use them punitively, then you're going to get very poor results. Now, so I said before that, the EQA panels may not pinpoint the pre-examination and post-examination process. However, we have to go through all of that, the challenge from the panel, how the sample is managed during the pre-examination, the examination phase, the report and the post-examination, and submission of the results back to the PT provider. We have to look at all of these steps to try and determine where the challenges and the issues could be coming from, and how we intervene and ensure that we get improved performance. So the EQA panel would help us to identify problems, and then we have to take corrective action. The corrective action, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes have to be punitive. It may require the separation of the testing personnel from the institution, from the laboratory. If it comes to that, then you need to make the very tough management decision and remove that person from the laboratory. So in summary, the external quality assurance is a system for objectively checking the lab's performance using an external agency or facility, and all laboratories should participate in EQA, whether your lab is gearing up towards getting accredited, or your lab has already been accredited, or your lab is not even working towards getting accreditation. It is important to take part in external quality assurance. And several methods of EQA are used, as we have discussed, and the samples must be treated the same way you treat patient samples. They should not be handled differently. I know that usually there's a tendency for labs or particular people to have champions in different test areas, that if it is this particular panel, it is given to technologist X, and if it is this panel, it is given to technician Y, that they're the best. Then you'll only be checking the performance and the competence of those testers, but not the lab systems in its entirety. So the key messages that we take from this podcast is that EQA uses valuable resources. It's expensive. So we must make the best possible use of this resource. As I have indicated and emphasized, it should not be punitive. However, If hard decisions need to be taken, then they must be taken. EQA should be reviewed as educational and can also help direct improvement efforts in particular areas. It is a critical element of a quality management system. I welcome your comments, I welcome your questions, your concerns. You can reach me at joundo664@gmail.com, joundo664@gmail.com. Thank you, and see you in the next podcast.